but wonderful to meet you. I've been a fan of your music for many years, an admirer of what you do.
Thank you.
And so I was really overjoyed when I learned we could get a chance to connect. It's one of the main benefits of this podcast, quite selfishly. It's like, yes, I get to share and dive into people's worlds for others' benefits, but for myself as well. And you're someone who I look at as a musician who takes great care with your work. It's very detailed and rich and doesn't seem to be bound by a whole lot of, I don't know if rules is the right word, uh, but
Yeah,
it's
I don't like genre boundaries much.
yeah, me neither. And I love that. But at the same time, like, you have a world. Anyway, so I see something in you. You make music that's very much your own. I'm not saying we're exactly in that same world, but we have some kind of crossover, and that's one of them. Is sort of like doing. You seem to do what you want to do, and you do it in a way that has quite a bit of detail. And let's just start. I'd like to ask some questions about music creation before we
Hmm.
get into some other areas because I'm very curious. But does it take you a long time to make your music? Typically, is your process quite labored?
Yeah,
And do you like to work on something and like keep coming back to it?
yeah,
Is it
yeah,
something like
absolutely.
it really takes many turns when you create a piece?
Yeah, I spend a long time on each piece, but I just um I love getting lost in harmonies and chord progressions and the atmosphere and the feeling of a piece of music. I really enjoy the process.
Yeah.
But I also get bored. I get bored of certain things quite easily, like rhythmical structures. But there's something about the chord progressions that I can just spend days and weeks in them and months. So everything else, a lot of my music is built in a certain way that isn't able to what can keep my attention for long enough, the length of time I want to spend immersed in the feelings of each piece of music. So for example, I get really bored of if there's a certain drum sound that I get really bored of a drum sound sounding the same throughout the piece of music, and I always want
Yeah.
to make it vary. And that's again with the detailing, it's a way of allowing me to spend as much time as I need to feel that I finished something. I'm putting it in there for my own enjoyment, and then that's just the way it comes out. Sometimes I set out to make a simple. I sit down and I say, today I'm going to make a simple club track, and it's going to sound like this, and I try and do that, and it just doesn't work out like that. I'm just sort of um, I feel sometimes like I don't decide what I get to make. I just it what comes out, and that's just
Totally.
the way it is.
But I've heard you say, I mean, you said that you don't play instruments, but I see a bunch of keyboards back there. And so tell me a
Mhm.
little bit more about literally how it is you like to create music.
So, I mean, I play keyboards badly. I love. I've been getting more and more into over the years improvising, and just setting up my synths and my pedals and just playing, hitting record, and then just playing, playing badly, and not worrying about it, and just trying to express myself. And some improvised pieces of music have come from that. Most of my last few albums, there's the odd track that has no BPM and has no sort of, it's a bit um musically unstructured, I'd say, but it has a vibe, it has a certain emotional message, and those tend to be the ones that I'm doing, improvising. But my techniques are very based on making a lot of mess and then sculpting. I often see myself more as a sculptor than a musician. I'll throw a lot of stuff at the wall and chuck a lot of stuff together and make this big mess, and then I start chipping away the bad bits. So I don't like that. I'll take it away. I'll take it away. It's more about taking away stuff than it is about putting it in. And then I just sculpt away until I've got the remaining piece of music, which is somehow coherent. But all that said, the starting point, I usually, the chord progressions are the beginning for me. So I start with
Yeah.
some emotional message usually, and I sort of put the chord progressions in, and then I start layering all these other things on top, which I have to sculpt away. So there's still that core that is there from start to finish.
Yeah. I often feel the same way. Like chords seem to have the magic
Mm.
energy in them of the emotion. And, from there, everything can kind of live from there. And melody too, like it all kind of stems from that place of chords. When you're doing this improv, do you find that that's where some of the real magic comes from? Like when you open yourself up to essentially a kind of chaos or a kind of non-thought process,
Mm.
that's sort of birthplace of just raw music creation. Have you been finding
Yeah,
that
there's
to be
definitely some magic in
especially
there.
fertile?
Yeah. Sorry, what did you say? Have I heard of?
Is it just especially fertile? I was just saying, like,
Oh, I thought you
that's sort
said
of a
you
newer
named an artist
process
that I
for
haven't
you.
heard of. Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's a lot to be said for daydreaming and the sort of intuitive state of mind and the intuitive approach to that. The way I've started ever since the beginning when I started making music, I just sat down and started messing around with stuff and did what felt right. I didn't really know what
Right.
why, or it's just, but I have a strong emotive connection to music and to particular types of harmonies, and I just use my emotional connection to music to guide me through without much knowledge of of music itself. So the intuitive side is definitely really important. And I did a track on the new album called Stream of Thought, where I was trying to access that sort of daydream state and just let my mind wander and let the music sort of wander like a stream. And then I worked on a beautiful visual project with Optical Arts Studio in London, and we did this project where we used slit scan photography, which captures time across each frame of the of the video, so that time is stretched out across the frame essentially, and then they smashed objects so that because they're captured in this particular technique, instead of just smashing normally, they smash into like a branching network. So it looks like you get these sort of stream like branches coming from these smashing plates and these smashing objects. So it was a really beautiful visual analogy of the idea as well. So yeah, I'm always looking for um, you know ways of visualizing the ideas that I'm thinking about, and a lot of the time I'll start with the visual ideas first and then write the music around that. Anyway, but yeah, stream of thought, and
Do
it's
you Which
an
that's
important thing.
interesting. I mean, if you think of yourself as a visual person and you're starting musical ideas from a visual space, I mean, does that have anything to do with being a scientist and seeing biology visually or the world
Yeah, I mean,
being
I
material?
definitely my the way I thought about the sciences was always, I was really into biosciences and spent a lot of many years, researching and working in that field. But yeah, I was always it was always a visual thing for me. There's all these, whether it's molecular or microbiological, there's these structures you can imagine. It's much easier to remember some sort of visual structure for me than it is to remember, the words describing it.
I think
So
of chords visually.
right,
I
and
mean,
I think
like,
music is the
I
same.
see, what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
definitely. When I listen to a piece of music, I can listen to a new piece of music and sort of categorize it really quickly in terms of a structure, where I could then memorize that quite easily and have it bash it. I could sort of figure predict where it's going to go, and it's great when people break the prediction. That's one of the
Yeah,
great
yeah,
things in
yeah.
music, when people don't follow through the structure they're implying. But certainly, yeah, music seems to have an aesthetic quality in it, which is very linked to architectural structure or some sort of you know abstract structures again, which could be in biology as well, and maths. And yeah, there's definitely that. It's hard to say to pin it down and say this piece of music looks exactly like this, but the feeling there's a very definite feeling about what chords should follow the when I'm working on a piece of music, what's the right thing. There's like in my mind, I know there's the right thing. I don't know what exactly it is, but when I find it, I know I've found the right one, and then I sort of piece things together like that. It's like building, having some sort of overall idea about what this abstract structure is, and then building it up from by trial and error. Really, that's my technique.
I mean, you hear people talk about music's relationship to math, but I don't think I very rarely have heard it like related to the biology of the planet or physical form, visually our landscape that we see. And is that something that's more just like an inspiration for you, or do you have sort of a synesthetic sense of music visually?
I've got very weak synesthesia in terms of whenever I'm going to sleep. If there's a sudden sound, I'll get like a flash of light, in my eyes, so that I've got some very weak, linkage of visual and sound, but it's not something that I experience. Some people listen to a piece of music and literally see colors, and they have that
Yeah,
really
Pharrell.
powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have it that to that extreme, but I have a very so stuff feels very right or very wrong. I've got there's a very clear sort of intuitive drive there, which I just experience emotionally with music. In terms of, I used to get really obsessed with what color my clips were in my music projects, and
Yeah,
get
I
really
do
annoyed
that
when they
too.
weren't the right colors and stuff like that. Less so these days. I managed to get over that one, but yeah, I'm not sure because also over the years, because I've done so many visual projects, I've just developed a bit of a language for myself in terms of what sort of, if I'm writing a certain piece of music or I'm working with a certain visual idea, what sort of piece of music should fit with that. That for me, there's clear linkages there, and I think a lot of it's to do with simple things like the envelopes of like your attack and release of or your attack and decay of certain sounds. If the sounds come in really quickly and they exit really quickly, are really sharp sounds, and you know and that's an aesthetic that's throughout the piece of music, then visually again you can apply it should be sharp, fast cutting things with lots of tight angles and there's a jaggedness about it. There's certain whereas if it's smooth pads and slowly coming in and slowly exiting again, visually there's a very obvious way that should fit with particular sorts of visual forms, and that's a really basic example. But I think there's a lot of examples like that when you start delving into it, working on visual projects and working on music and thinking about how they interact. There's a lot of things that just seem right, a lot of rules that you set up like that. So I think having worked on, done lots of collaborations with visual artists over the years, that has influenced my, this idea of the structure of a piece of music in terms of, a visual structure that's associated with a piece of music.
It's fascinating. I mean, in a way, do you consider yourself a visual artist? Like if a blending of,
Um,
maybe it doesn't manifest that way. You're making recorded music, but in a sense, you're coming at it in this visual sense.
um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I love visual art, and I love, you know, doing visual shows, but I don't know. I, I guess I'm a wannabe visual artist. Definitely, I'd like to be one.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know if I qualify. It depends what your definition is.
exactly. Yeah. Well, I'm hearing, this emotional place that you're creating from, and that being kind of the litmus test, which I think is true for a lot of us. But, your music can sometimes be very technical, sort of objective,
Hmm.
but it also is deeply emotional. And are these things that work concurrently very naturally for you, or does it feel like you try to keep one more at bay or let one be driving the ship?
Yeah, I think they fit very naturally. I think yeah, the boundaries between who we are and the machines we make have been breaking down over the centuries, and ever more so as time goes on. So I think I see myself very much as a machine.
Wow.
I don't feel like I'm free to. Actually, a lot of the part of the point a lot of the new album was about this idea of that we're stuck inside this thing, the human brain, with all these ancient evolutionary forces defining how we feel about things and pushing us to behave in certain ways, and human biases and all. We're inside this super complex machine, like wrestling with it in a sense. Being annoyed about how often do you do something and be annoyed at yourself for doing something. If you were really in control, you just wouldn't do the thing that it's. But we're all inside this machine having to deal with it. And I feel like that's totally natural, but also it's part of the thing that riles me and thing that I make commentary on musically. Actually, the new album's called Unspoken Words, and it's about trying to communicate things which are hard to put into words, and that was an aspect of it. The visual projects, when I put them all together, turned into this sort of story of post-humanism, and this some sort of like deep drive to want to get away from the system, escape the constraints. And the visual story of the whole album, when it put together, turned into that this sort of narrative where eventually, after much toil and learning and transcendence, we actually do, and technology as well, we actually do escape. So yeah, I think the boundary between what a machine is and what we are, I think, is one that is dissolving over time. So for me, they're totally compatible. It's totally compatible to have emotion in a machine-like world, and have mechanics or machine-like processes in an emotional world. And that's the other thing. I think artists have always relied on sort of I won't say mechanical processes, but techniques that seem like more part of science, I suppose, than the arts. I mentioned this. There was a documentary I saw about the artist Vermeer, and how they I think they were a Dutch artist in maybe the 1800s, a long time
Yeah.
ago. And they did these paintings that blew everyone's minds because they were so photorealistic, and people thought this artist was a genius. And and then in more recent years, people have proposed that there's this technique they used, which involving mirrors and essentially a procedural technique for creating those types of images. But
Mm.
then some of the historians got angry that they were questioning this sort of artistic integrity of this person, in terms of saying, well, they just did this technique to build these beautiful pieces of art. But I think that's always been part of art, and as artists, we're problem solvers, and we people fiddling with synths and over the and building modular systems, and there's so much technical generative processes that we have to employ. I think that's a very natural part of the of the arts and of human expression. So again, that's the machine side of things delving into the human side of things. So I think it goes both ways. And then obviously with machine learning, we're getting a whole new world of possibilities opening up in that realm, where we can start to use machines in an ever more, even more humanized, even more organic sort of way. So it's pretty exciting, that realm.
How do you think that AI or machine learning tools will change music creation beyond like the ways that we're doing like intelligent EQ and things like that? I mean, do you have any fears or thoughts that our jobs will be outsourced to an AI that makes 1,000 or 1,000,000 songs while you're sleeping just for each person? And
Not really. I mean, it's going to open a lot of doors artistically. We'll be able to express ourselves more fully, in my mind, and
mhm,
that's a great thing. And also, it'll be the arts can be more accessible. I mean, it's been the invention of the digital audio workstation. Essentially, you've got your computer
yeah.
and you can make music, has created this huge explosion of electronic music and all sorts of music around the world, and that's been a great thing. Spawning all sorts of genres and creativity. And I think machine learning systems will open the doors further in terms of enabling us to express ourselves, and to use music and arts as a means of expressing things that are important to us. So I think in that sense, I see it to be really positive. In terms of us losing our jobs, as musicians, um, I don't I don't think. I mean, I think the thing with music and with art in general is, yes, we might want to go to a concert by a machine learning system, but essentially we're humans and we're stuck inside this vessel, of being a human, which has its challenges, and we want to communicate with other people about the human condition, and about this thing that the life we have to deal with. And music is a communication between two humans. Like if I say, I don't know, the Beatles or Nirvana to you, you don't think about the waveform. You think about the humans at the other end and their lifestyle and what they did and what they meant to the world, and all these. There's all these like you know human associations that go into listening to music. And if the AI system was doing it devoid of those stories, I don't think it really connects with us as human listeners. We want to know that the person at the other end was having a great time, or that they were having a really terrible time and they were tortured and they were sharing and that with them. And I think it's important to have a human at the other side. So I don't think that while the AI pure removing the humans production of in the creation of music systems might be interesting, I don't think they're going to fully take over. So I see it more in a positive light in terms of opening creative doors. There's lots of things I want to do musically that I can't yet, and I can see that machine learning systems are opening the doors for me to be able to do the things I want. So it's enabling. And the other thing is, I mean, I'm already not a trained musician of any sort. I'm trained as a scientist, and I love music and have a connection to it, and I use machines to enable me to express myself. And I already use generative processes in my music, and I get the machines to do make these complex messes, which I then curate. I'm a curator of my machines.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
in
What a
that sense.
phrase. Yeah, a
So
curator of your
yeah, in that
machines.
sense, it's really just same. It's just another step along that path.